Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the economy and markets in Path of Exile. So I have this text file open. I'll go over the contents of this, but just kind of a quick refresher on the last video that dealt with automation. The product of that idea of automating Path of Exile is that you can have a player character profile, which is your style of gameplay that an AI is controlling, and you can watch or you can just let it run and it will play the game for you. And so what we're going to talk about today is specifically how, with that profile that's automated, you can customize it to run certain content for you, as well as what it means in terms of the market and the economy to have an automated game. Alright, so the first thing we'll talk about is the market within the vendor scenario and kind of how you get the automated profile customization of what it's going to run. Alright, so basically you would take this automated test, and in this test you would try to portray your profile character player style. So there would be some map stress test where you would run this map, and there would be chests and barrels, monsters and bosses, all sorts of different ways you can play the game would be incorporated into this map stress test. And then when you ran this test, when you ran this map, and you use a flask or you use an attack or you're moving around, all of that's being recorded as your specific gameplay style. And then the way that this is telling you what's going on is there's going to be a map stress test group damage per second meter, like a boss health bar, but for the whole level or the whole map that you're playing. And so in order for that to be done, every single monster in the game would have to have a specific time to kill. So the developers would have to, Grinding Gear Games would have to make about how long it should take to kill a monster, and then with modifiers, how does that change how long it takes to kill one specific monster. And then you can scale to all the other levels of that monster, and once you do modifiers for one monster, you could scale those for all monsters, right? And so then this map stress test is going to have all these monsters in it that take an average time to kill. And there's this group damage per second meter. And so the goal is, if you can do the map while killing and exiting in a timely manner, you will show how much reward you should be given for your playstyle. So the way that it would work is that you go into the map stress test and you open a chest here, you go after a mob there, and then you start dragging other mobs into a bigger group, kill them, and then you're towards the exit. you did, let's just say, average in the amount of time it would take and average in the amount of damage that it would take to get to the end of the level. And once you're done with the stress test, once you've completed the map, let's say you get this result back, and this result is going to be all these different pieces of content, essences, delve, different map modifiers, physical elemental reflection, that sort of stuff, right? And based on how you performed with your playstyle in this stress test, you will have all these outputs that have a certain reward to them. So let's say that your character is good at a specific piece of content, and so is your playstyle rewarding in that piece of content. Like, let's say it's delve. What would happen is you would see delve, and you would see, in terms of chaos orbs, just as kind of a placeholder standard, we're just going to use chaos orbs. It would say that you did above normal or below normal of a chaos orb standard. And what I mean by that is the chaos orb in the vendor would cost 1 chaos orb if you hadn't done the stress test. And this chaos orb has a certain drop chance. And so every other item in the game has a certain drop chance, and you can make it relative to some placeholder standard. In this case, I'm using chaos orb. So say you want some rare pair of boots with these very specific modifiers on them. There's a drop chance for each of those modifiers on the boots, and there's a drop chance for that specific base type of boots, and all that would get factored in terms of chaos orbs, and you would be able to buy that item from the shop. Alright, so if you have delve in this stress test output, and it says that you can make 2 chaos orb instead of 1 chaos orb, that means you're better at delve than the average. Your specific playstyle and your specific character. Which, when you take the test, it's going to be the gear and skills that you've put points into, or that you've put onto your character. And so anytime you change gear, or anytime you change your skill tree, you would have to retake the stress test. Alright, so this is something typically you would do after maps, right? So before maps, you would just have a vendor where it wouldn't have like the pair of boots I mentioned, it would just have whatever is in the vendor. And so the advantage of doing this stress test is that you can put every item that is in delve into the vendor. So let's just say a resonator is in the vendor screen. You can buy that in terms of chaos orbs. And because your chaos orb standard is 2 for delve specifically, that would mean it's easier to do delve content with your character and playstyle. So then, if you decide to include delve in your Chaos Orb standard, let's say that's the only thing that you decide to check the box next to, that would mean that you can run your character automatically, walk away from the computer, and it will be playing Delve content, and it will get 2 Chaos Orbs as the standard. Let's just say in an hour it'll get 2 Chaos Orbs. Alright, so if you would have done bad in Delve, let's say you get 0.5 as your Chaos Orb standard. That would mean that the items in the vendor, the resonators from Delve, would be of a price that is more expensive. Right? So when you have 2, the items in the vendor are content that you can do pretty easily. So those items are cheaper. The resonators are cheaper. But because you're running it so good, you're getting 2 Chaos Orbs per hour or whatever. That's the advantage of keeping Delve in your Chaos Orb standard. The resonators sell for less, but because you're able to do the content better, you're able to get more Chaos Orbs. And if your Chaos Orb standard is 0.5, that means you're not able to do Delve that well. The resonators are more expensive. And you have, if you've only run automated content, you have less Chaos Orbs to buy the resonators with. Alright, so essentially what I'm saying is there's this standard 1 Chaos Orb where the price of resonators will be exactly as their drop chance is had you done Delve. Exactly like everybody else does on average, based on the amount of time the developers determine it would take to kill all the monsters, right? And do a specific node with all those monsters there, given the modifiers that they have and everything like that, right? So once you have this 0.5 versus 2 Chaos Orb standard, if your standard is 1 Chaos Orb, that means the resonators are at the price that they should be at if you're doing Delve on average just like everyone else is. But if you dip below that and you're still automatically running the content, you're at 0.5, let's say, that means you get less Chaos Orbs per hour, and the resonators are more expensive. And the way that they're more expensive is because the drop chance has changed accordingly to the Chaos Orb standard. And what I mean by that isn't that the resonators are going to drop more often or less often. What I mean is that the Chaos Orbs that you're getting are lower, and so the resonators are going to be more expensive, right? Compared to somebody who runs Delve with a 2 Chaos Orb standard. And so those people with the 2 Chaos Orb standard, they can buy twice the amount of resonators as somebody with a 1 Chaos Orb standard. Alright, so now that we got the fundamentals, what happens is that players are going to try to change this Chaos Orb standard to include content that they want to run to get money, or perhaps they're going to change the Chaos Orb standard to do content that they don't usually do because it's more difficult. Or they're going to change their Chaos Orb standard to include certain items in the vendor. Alright, so if you include maps and Delve, all the Delve specific items that drop, like the resonators, will be in the vendor. And if you include maps, all the specific items from maps would be in the vendor. Like, let's just say scarabs. And so if you're better at scarabs than you are, or let's just say maps, if you're better at maps than you are Delve, that's gonna alter, the average Chaos Orb standard. And so with resonators, let's just say for an example, being something that you run really well, and so you can buy more of them. But then let's say the scarabs, you don't run maps that well, so the scarabs would be more expensive, because let's say the average Chaos Orb standard that you have is 1.2. So what you did is the average between how you ran Delve and how you ran maps. If you figure that you're going to do less automation of Delve, and that you're going to do Delve because it's the content that your character is designed for, doing Delve automatically isn't something that you're interested in, but you are interested in being able to sell those resonators. And you don't really want to do maps, so you want to automatically run those maps. And so whereas before you were just running maps automatically, now you're running maps with Delve. That makes scarabs less expensive, because it's at a Chaos Orb standard of 1.2 and not something like 0.5. Where this makes sense in this example is that you included Delve and maps together, not because you were going to automatically run Delve, but because you wanted to automatically run maps, and you wanted to manually run Delve. And with the profits from Delve, you wanted to afford the scarabs at a better price. So that's kind of how this could play out, right? And the whole point of having a Chaos Orb standard, or just any placeholder standard, is so that you can use the automation that I described in the beginning to run the playstyle of the character automatically to determine what pieces of content they can do well and what pieces of content they can't do that good, and then have the player make the choice about what they want to do automatically and what they want in their vendor screens, at what price they want them and the vendor screens. So to just go over what's in front of you here, right? I kind of covered this as like the standard of one Chaos Orb and the group damage per second on the map. And then I kind of covered this with describing how there's a drop chance for essences, just like there's a drop chance for Chaos Orbs, and that would be altered depending on the drop chance of the Chaos Orbs. And then the other thing is if you're unable to do content, if you die or you get like a very low Chaos Orb standard on it, you could include that in the average, but most likely it's going to be something that you aren't allowed to run with your character, right? You can't automatically run that. And then this is all covered, right? So you can imagine a world in which the vendor has all these items available that you have in your standard from content like maps and Delve, for example. And then you're automatically running some of the content. Like let's say you want your player profile to run Delve. You can tell it to run Delve. You can tell it to run maps. Whatever's in your standard, you can tell it to run. And so if you have it run Delve while you're away from the computer or the console or whatever, you're going to have the profits that you can then spend on a more affordable scarab in the example that I used. And so there are multiple different ways to kind of design your standard so it's either more automatic or more manual. It includes more stuff in the vendor, or it allows you to do pieces of content that you want to do and only want to do that piece of content, etc., right? And ideally, you would take the Chaos Orb standard test and you would be able to include all pieces of content, and your standard would be one Chaos Orb. So the drop rates as the developers intended, but automatically being able to run all content, as well as being able to afford any item in the game for the drop rate chance that it is. Alright, so let's talk about now this player market, not the vendor market, the player market. So like when you go on the trade website or you go to Faustus, whatever, right? Let's say it cost 1.5 divine. One player, it costs them 2 divine, and for another player it costs them 1 divine based on their local vendor prices. Okay, so these are vendor prices, and this is the player market price. Okay, so this player, where it costs them 2 divine in their vendor, if they make a player market trade where they buy something that would cost them 2 divine for 1.5 divine, what happens is that 0.5 difference of a divine would make the items for this player cheaper in the vendor. So if 2 divine is what it costs in the vendor, but they get something for 1.5 divine, they have to get .5 divine items injected into their local economy, basically. Alright, so because it cost their local economy 2 divine, but they go in the global economy for 1.5 divine. So now the items in their vendor, like let's say they try to sell something that was worth 1 divine, now they would only be able to sell that to their local vendor for 0.5 divine. And as soon as they do that, now they've essentially paid 2 divine for this item that they have. They paid 1.5 divine to essentially, let's just say, a global vendor, and then they paid 0.5 divine to their local vendor. So all in all, it cost them 2 divine. 0.5 goes to the local vendor on the next sale of their item. But if they were to try to buy an item, it would be 0.5 divine more expensive in their local vendor. And let's say that they don't sell or pay at the local vendor. Let's say they do another global market trade, or like another player trade. The next item they sell or buy is going to be adjusted by 0.5 divine. It doesn't mean that that other player gets 0.5 divine. It means that their local vendor gets the 0.5 divine. So in the case where you pay 2 divine by 1.5 divine going to the player that you're trading with, and then the next vendor sale you make, having the item be 0.5 more expensive, or the next item that you sell in the global market, 0.5 divine goes to, you would have to, like, let's say you're selling an item for 0.5 divine. If you give that to another player, the player will trade you 0.5 divine, but that divine will go directly to the local vendor. It'll just disappear. You won't see the divine. Alright, so that's the 2 scenarios here, right? Essentially, you're trying to balance for anybody who spends outside of their local economy to get something globally, like let's say they don't have something on their specific vendor screen because they can't automate it, they're not good at the content. Let's say it's like a T17 map drop. What you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, they can pay, like, if it would cost them 2 divine, right, to get this, but it's not in their vendor screen, but it would cost them 2 divine if it was in their vendor screen, they can pay 1.5 divine globally and then just have 0.5 divine also be paid to their local vendor at some point in time, whether it's from another trade in the vendor screen or from another player on player trade. Alright, so just going to go over this real quick. If you have 1 divine item in your trade window, basically, in the case where it's 2 divine, right? So 2 divine did this trade, right? So the next selling that you're going to do of a 1 divine item, you would have to sell that item for 0.5 divine more. Okay, so you follow that? So if you have a 2 divine vendor trade, but it's not in your vendor window, but it's on the global market, you pay the global person 1.5 divine, but the next trade you do is going to be 0.5 different. And so let's say you sell something either at your local or global vendor, you would have to sell that item at 0.5 more, so 1.5 divine total. At the local vendor or the global vendor. If that item was only worth 1 divine. So you're selling this 1 divine item, and you have to make up for 0.5 divine. So this item has to be more expensive by 0.5 divine. So it's not listed globally at 1.5 divine. It's listed globally at 1 divine. And in the vendor window, it wouldn't be 1.5 divine. It would be 0.5 divine is what you would get for the item if you sold it. Because the other 0.5 divine goes to the vendor. So that way you balance for the fact that you made a global trade and took money out of your local economy. That being 0.5 divine out of your local economy. Because it would have cost you 2 divine, but you got it for 1.5, so now you need to somehow pay 0.5 divine somewhere. That's essentially all this is saying, right? Something that costs 1.5 globally on the player market, that would cost you, in this case, 2 divine at the local vendor, and you don't have that item in the vendor trade screen because you don't include that item in your standard. So you pay the 1.5 globally, and then you have to pay back the 0.5 either in a local vendor trade or a global vendor trade, and you can sell or buy. The item would be listed as it's supposed to that other person. You see? So if you're selling an item that's 1 divine, the other person looking at it will only see it for 1 divine. But all you'll get in return for this is 0.5 divine. The other 0.5 divine gets deleted because it's balancing for the fact that you got a 2 divine item for 1.5 divine. Alright, makes sense? Okay, so we're moving on. So, I kind of went over this already, but let's just go over it again, right? So, player 1, item 1 costs 1 divine, item 2 costs 1 divine. Player 2, item 1 costs 1 divine, item 2 costs 1 divine. Player 1 trades item 1 for item 2. Player 2 trades item 2 for item 1. Player 1 has item 2 and player 2 has item 1. So now, the first player has item 2, and the second player has item 1. So if player 2 never had item 1 available to them, but they had item 2, and it's the same price, it's an equal exchange. That's what the global market is for. That's the economy. Okay? That's what you're supposed to be doing when you're trading with somebody. You're not supposed to scam them with profiting, or you're not supposed to scam yourself with selling under the other people. No, it's not supposed to be like that. This is how it's supposed to be, right? And so this other example, right? If player 1's item 1 is 1 divine, their item 2 is 2 divine. Player 2, item 1 is 2 divine, item 2 is 1 divine. Right? So player 1 trades item 1, which is 1 divine, for item 2 that is 1 divine. Now item 2 is 1 divine in the second player's market, their local economy. So this is still a fair trade right here. Even though item 2 is 2 divine in player 1's economy. So when player 1 looks at the global market and he sees item 2 for 1 divine, where in his market it's 2 divine, but in the other player's market, their item 1 is 2 divine. And in your market, item 1 is 1 divine. It's a fair trade as well. So, player 1 trades for item 2, and player 2 trades for item 1, and it's a fair trade because it's really only worth 1 divine in the other person's market, as in item 2 is worth 1 divine, item 1 is worth 1 divine, player 1 wants item 2. So now the question is right, so if player 1 has item 2 that is worth 2 divine, what happens if they sell that item? So player 1 sells item 2 to vendor for 1 divine. Price tag globally is 2 divine. Player only gets 1. You see that? So even though player 1 has an item 2 that's worth 2 divine, they sell item 2 to their vendor for only 1 divine. Because the other thing that I'm not sure if I mentioned or not yet is basically every item has to have a data tag on it that basically just says what that item is worth it's kind of like a trade history almost, but like, so item 1 for player 1, when you trade that item, the tag on the item is 1 divine. But for player 2, item 1 is 2 divine. So they see player 1 selling item 1 for 1 divine. That's the tag on the item. 1 divine. But they see, player 2 sees that item 2 in player 1's economy is only worth 1 divine. So he can trade his second item for player 1's first item. So the tag on the item, when player 1 trades item 1 for item 2, as soon as the item transfers from player 2, item 2, into player 1, that item 2 is going to have the tag of 1 divine. So when player 1 tries to sell item 2 after the trade in their local vendor, they would only get 1 divine based on the tag that they see. And the way that player 2 sees that he can trade item 2 for 1 divine to player 1 is because the tag on item 1 is 1 divine. And so when player 2 looks for any item that he has that's worth 1 divine, it's worthy of being traded to player 1, and player 1 knows he's not getting scammed whatever the item, because in his market he doesn't have that item for any other price besides 1 divine. So he can always just sell the item. Even if he doesn't want the item, he can just sell the item and get a divine. So it's worth the trade no matter what, even if it's an item you will never use. Right, so just in summary here, I'll start from the beginning. You have this automated game that can play itself. And then you have these player character profiles that are modeled after the gameplay style that you have for that specific character. And then you have this map stress test. And depending on how you play, according to the group damage per second meter for that map stress test, will determine, after being automated and putting your profile against every map modifier piece of content that there is, you will then get this output of what you want to automate, what you want listed in your vendor, and what you want to do manually. And then there's this economy globally that is balanced with your local economy, so you will never be able to inject money in, even if you swipe your credit card, because the major thing is, like, let's say somebody trades you 60 divine. Because 60 divine in their local economy is 60 divine, if you accept that 60 divine, now any sale or any purchase that you have will cost 60 divine, right? So you have this trade restriction essentially where anybody who trades with another player, if they trade you something that in their local economy is worth what it's worth, you cannot trade them unless you have an item of equal worth. So when I said you accept the 60 divine and then next sale you make or next purchase you make 60 divine, no, there's no such thing as debt, right? So that wouldn't work. So the way it would work is you only have the ability to trade with people that will give you an item of equal price. So there's no swiping your credit card. I hope that makes sense. But essentially, nobody can get another item unless they trade them an equal item on the global market. And locally, if you trade for something on the global market, let's say there's an item that's worth 1 chaos on the global market, but in your market it's worth 1 divine, you still have to pay that back with your next purchase or sale. So everything will be in balance, right? So ideally, the way this would work is the game would be fully automated, fully balanced, and then the point of trade between players is because you don't have it in your local vendor screen, and the only things that are automated are things that you've done before. So it can be an online game while an offline game at the same time with no credit card swiping. And so yeah, that's all I got for you guys. Let me know.